Welcome to this Prepare for IELTS video in which we're going to go through the grammatical points and structures you need to write a good IELTS essay. We'll start off by looking at sentences. These are complex sentences with subordinate clauses or relative clauses. We'll look at sentences with WH clauses and that clauses. Then we'll move on to verbs and we'll look at perfect tenses, conditional tenses, using passives as well as verb structures with infinitives and ing. We'll look more generally at the use of ing, participle clauses, and verb plus object plus infinitive. And we'll end with nouns, looking at complex noun phrases and nominalizations. These are all key features of strong grammar. So we'll start with looking at complex sentences with subordinate clauses. There are various types. You can see here the subordinate clause is in blue, and these are all concession sentences, beginning with although, even though, and whilst. Sometimes these sentences begin with time phrases such as soon as, until, before, or after, and sometimes they're conditional with words like as long as, provided that, and if. So being able to use these sentences with a main clause in black and a subordinate clause in blue is a good idea. There's another type of sentence which is very useful, and these are with relative clauses. Again, we can see the relative clause in blue and a relative pronoun in green. So here we use the pronoun who because we are referring to a person or people, in this case children and school children. We can also use whose when it is possessive, so the children belong to the parents. We can use which when we are referring to things. Sometimes you can use that, but I would recommend always using which in IELTS. Sometimes we can use where when we refer to a place, and even when we refer to a time. And we can use these as non-defining clauses as well. So when they're just giving extra and not necessary information, we can put the clause inside commas and again use similar pronouns. And especially with which, we can use phrases in front of it like none of which, some of which, several of which, a few of which, so it's good to know these as well. Now WH clauses, and you can see that they often begin with a WH question such as why or when, where or who, which or what, but they can also begin with how and how many. So these are usually noun clauses. They can make your grammar a lot more complex. They can look very good, and lots of IELTS candidates fail to use them. Something else which is really easy to use and can really make your writing better is a that clause. And that clauses, again, are often nominal, so they often really function as a noun. And you can see what often happens is we start a sentence with it. So the first one, it is important to note that the number of dangerous viruses is on the rise. So this is a clause. The number of dangerous viruses is on the rise. But actually, this is referred to at the beginning of the sentence in it. So using that clauses is a great idea. Learning the structures that go in front of them is a great idea. You can make your writing much more complex very quickly. Now let's move on to tenses and everybody's favourite, the perfect tense. So we can start with the present perfect, have or has, and a participle such as fallen or risen. And we tend to use the present perfect to refer to things which happened in the past which are strongly connected to now. So if you have in your sentence an adverb with a finished time, like last year or 10 years ago or in 1996, then almost certainly you will not be using a perfect tense. But when you want to refer to something which you can see now, which is evident now, which happened in the past, then there is a good chance you will use a present perfect tense. It's good to note the passive form of present perfect because they get mixed up quite often. So if you look at this sentence, since the discovery of penicillin, literally millions of lives have been saved. So have plus been plus a past participle. We could write doctors have saved millions of lives since the discovery of penicillin. But we're using a passive form here. And the reason why we mention this is so that you don't get confused with the present perfect continuous form, which is has, been, and an ing. So we have has or have, been, and a past participle like saved is passive, and has or have, been, and an ing form is active, and it's a continuous tense. So we tend to use this continuous tense for things which started in the past and continue right up until now. We can use the past perfect, had seen, when we want to refer to the earlier of two events, and we can use the future perfect, will have melted, when we want to refer to something which will finish in the future before a particular time, so by 2050. Next, conditionals, and we have structures which are often referred to as first conditionals, and they refer to things which are quite possible, quite likely, usually in the future. So the first one, if we run out of clean drinking water, we will not be able to survive. So the clause in the subordinate part of the sentence, if we run out of clean drinking water, this is possible, it could happen, and the main clause tells us about the result of that. We can use these with words like if and unless, as long as, and provided. Then we have second conditional clauses which are very similar, but you can see that the verb in the subordinate clause, it looks like it's in the past tense, it's actually in the subjunctive, so cared or were past or became. So these are to describe hypothetical or very, very, very unusual situations. Again, the main clause describes the result. And finally, we have a third conditional, and that has had taken, so past perfect in the if clause. And then there are a couple of options in the main clause. If you use would have been or would have plus a participle, then that indicates two past actions. The second one didn't happen because the first one didn't happen, and they were both in the past. If you use would be, then you indicate a present situation which does not happen because the situation in the past did not happen. So third conditionals are not that common in IELTS essays. It's often very difficult to get one in, but second conditionals and first conditionals are very useful. And now we move on to a very important grammatical structure, which is passives. Here's an example of a passive. It is generally believed that nutrition relates to health. So we could write here, doctors generally believe that nutrition relates to health, but we don't want to focus on the people. We want to focus on the idea that many people believe this. So we can use a passive form here. This is a present simple passive form. There are present continuous passive forms. So we could write somebody is gradually destroying our planet, but we want to focus on the planet and not on the people destroying it, so we can write that the planet is gradually being destroyed. There are also simple past forms, so we could write that during the pandemic, salespeople didn't sell many cars, but we want to focus on the cars, so we will write very few cars were sold. There is a present perfect form of the passive. In fact, there are passive forms for nearly all verb structures, and they're very often used with modals, so verbs like ought to and need to, may, might, must, can and could, and using passives with these modal verbs can really make your writing seem very formal and academic. Onwards, and now we're looking at verb structures with infinitives. So all of the verbs here in blue can be followed by a second verb in an infinitive form, just as the ones are here in red. This is useful to know because candidates make so many mistakes with verb structures. And as we're talking about infinitives, we better talk about ing forms as well. So there are many verbs which can be followed by an ing. Some verbs like these are generally followed by an ing form, though just occasionally it is possible to follow a couple of these verbs with infinitives. I don't think that's an area you should worry about. Also, there are a series of verb forms ending in prepositions like about or up, from on or against, and these nearly always get followed by an ing form. And then there are some structures which have objects in, so to disapprove of somebody doing something, to object to somebody doing something, or to prevent, stop, or deter somebody from doing something. So these are useful structures to learn because many candidates get them wrong. And as we're looking at ing forms, we better look at them more generally. So when do you use ing forms? This really confuses candidates. So firstly, you probably are aware in verb structures, so in continuous forms, the present, future, and past continuous forms. As well as that, we can use ing forms as nouns. So working from home is the subject of this sentence, and going into an office, again, really works as a noun phrase. And we can use meaning here in quite an interesting way to replace a relative clause. So we could write, health services have been privatized, which means that poorer people no longer have access to them. So we're replacing a relative clause with an ing form. And this ing form, meaning, replaces which means that, and it refers back to the first clause. So health services have been privatized. We can use ing forms as adjectives, hardworking individuals, and we can use them after prepositions. And you can see this is actually a perfect ing form, having graduated. So we could write, most people are proud of graduating from university, but if we want to focus on the fact that this graduation happened in the past, we can use having graduated. We can also use before and after, especially. So before finishing their degrees, many students start applying for jobs. What you're really writing here is before they finish their degrees or after they finish their degrees. And generally, it's good to see that we can use prepositions before ing forms. So by working hard, this is how you do it. After having discussed, and having discussed are interesting too, because again, these are perfect forms. They have the verb have as an auxiliary verb in them, and these are very nice ways of starting your conclusion when you are giving your position for the first time. So ing forms can be complicated, but there are some great times to use them. And now we're moving on to another related point, which is participle clauses, and you can see a lot of them here. So you can see ing forms in red, those are present participles, and you can see past participles in blue. And these can both be used, again, as with the word meaning on the previous slide, these can both be used to replace relative clauses. Let's have a look at the first example. The number of people living in poverty has risen. So we could write the number of people who live in poverty, but we can replace who live with an ing form. You're probably wondering what's the difference between the red ones and the blue ones. What's the difference between the present participle and the past participle? And if we look at the first blue example, so vegetables grown in poorer tropical regions are exported to wealthier parts of the world. And here, what we're really saying is vegetables which are grown or which have been grown. So this is a passive. Somebody grows them, but we are focusing on the vegetables and we're using a passive form. And when it's passive, we use the past participle. Those are great examples of formal complex grammar. The examiner loves them. Moving on now to another lovely structure, and this is verb plus object plus infinitive. You can see the verbs are in red, the objects are in blue, and they are followed by an infinitive in green. And these are just structures worth knowing because, again, candidates often fail to use them. The more you can use, the better. Moving on now to nouns, and we're going to look at noun phrases and how you can make a complex noun phrases. There are many things you can do. So you can start with determiners, so you can put phrases like this child, each and every child, every single child. You can put this information before a noun. The noun is in red. You can, of course, put adjective forms before nouns. You can see here that we have put an adjective form before the noun and also an a relative clause replacement after it. So company bosses who work hard, but we've replaced that with working. And small and medium-sized businesses unsupported by the government, which are unsupported. So that is an example of the participle clauses we looked at before. More examples, we can put adjectives before and after prepositional phrases, such as with a presence on every major high street around the world, or with learning difficulties and problems paying attention, or of major world famous companies such as Google or Unilever. So we can follow nouns with these lovely prepositional phrases. And if we want a great complex noun, here's an example of one using many of the structures that we've mentioned above. So complex noun phrases are a great idea. Something else which is a great idea is nominalization, and you can see that in the red here. So nominalization means turning other structures into nouns wherever you possibly can. So if we look at the first one, the probable disappearance of many animal species within the next century is worrying. Now we could write the fact that animals are disappearing is very worrying, and that also has a noun element in it, but using as many nouns as you can is a good idea. A good example lower down, the enormity of that problem means that a solution cannot be found, and we could write that problem is enormous, so it is hard to find a solution, but this seems much less formal. Don't have nominalization at the front of your mind all the time. It is a good formal strategy, but it's not something that you absolutely need to include. Once or twice in an essay would be lovely. So we hope that helps, and we hope that now you can use a wider range of grammatical structures and impress the IELTS examiner. Examiners are very keen to give a high grade, and if they do see examples of good grammar, they will give you credit. We look forward to seeing you again soon, and thank you for watching.